How a Deist Can Have a Good Relationship with God, Part 2. In Part 1 of this series, I talked about God and how we can have a good relationship with God by doing good. I will start this video by talking about how being honest helps us have a good relationship with God. God is either all reality or the most important being in reality. God at least purposely created the universe, so God is more important than any being that is just a small part of the universe. If I didn't ever exist, the universe would still exist. Yet if God didn't exist, the whole universe itself would never have gotten started. The way to have a good relationship with reality is to be honest, to purposefully tell the truth without telling a lie. A good relationship between the part of reality that is me and the part of reality that is not me is when the former perceives and the latter is when the former perceives and accepts the latter as completely as possible. When I see something that is good, I should accept that that I see a good thing. When I hear something that is bad, I should accept that I hear a bad thing. The more I accept reality as it is, the more I accept God as God is. The more I accept God as God is, the better relationship I have with God. Like so many other things, honesty can be a habit. The more one is honest, the better one becomes at purposefully telling the truth without telling a lie. That is one reason why one should always be honest with oneself and God, and usually be honest with everyone else. One will never completely deceive oneself, and one will never deceive God in the slightest. God is much more knowledgeable and intelligent than we will ever be. God almost certainly knows everything there is to know about us. Thus, instead of lying to God, we should do the opposite. We should always try to tell God the whole truth about everything. We mortal humans have our struggles and secrets, so we desperately need a trustworthy confidant. That is one reason why we should lovingly and respectfully use God as the greatest possible confidant. God knows everything anyway, and will definitely not blab our secrets. God can and should be our free psychotherapist and ultra discreet best friend. Have I mentioned that honesty is generally a good deed? It accepts reality as reality is, so that reality can be dealt with wisely. And it promotes trust and happiness, at least happiness in the long run. If God is completely aligned with good, and I hope and believe that God is, we become better aligned with God by being better aligned with good. Doing good deeds, such as practicing honesty, is an important part of being aligned with good. Doing evil deeds, such as being dishonest, makes us misaligned with good. Now it is time to talk about prayer. Different deists have different beliefs and practices regarding prayer. Some like praying and do it often, others hate it and don't do it at all, and others are somewhere in between. I am somewhere in between. Often, I talk with God when I am alone in my car, just to have someone perfect to talk to, or to have a free psychotherapist. Of course, if God talks back to me, it is not with words that I hear with my ears. Maybe it is with emotions and thoughts. Yet even if God does not talk back to me, such talking seems to help me, so I will keep doing it anyway. Sometimes I talk to God just to thank God. I think that this is a good practice for me because it cultivates thankful thoughts and a thankful attitude within me. Thankful people are happier and more pleasant to be with than unthankful people. The following is the prayer that I usually think before I eat. Thank you, good providers, for this food. May the hungry always be fed. Occasionally, I ask God for something unusual. When I ask God for something unusual, I don't expect a miracle. I just hope for one. Maybe God intervenes in the natural working of the universe, or maybe God doesn't. If God does, God probably does so in a covert way, so that even if God does a miracle, it is debatable whether it was an extreme coincidence or not. I think that asking for God's help can be beneficial as the final act of a series of wise actions. Here is an example. I try to eat right and exercise so that I will have a long and happy life. But I am still a little scared of dying. I think that almost all humans are at least a little scared of dying because we know that we will die someday, but are programmed by nature to try to survive. Sometimes when I lay face down in bed, which is often how I most easily fall asleep, I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and this reminds me that someday that heart will stop beating and I will die. Often that is when I feel the fear. To help me sleep in many of those instances, I ask God to help me somehow. Maybe God helps me because of my prayer, or maybe God doesn't. I'm not sure. What I am sure of is that I have done everything that I reasonably can to live a good life, and that I am hoping and trusting in God to help me have the best future that I can have. After I pray, I usually sleep well. I have another example of when I did the best that I could and then asked God to help me as the final act of a series of wise actions, or at least the wisest actions that I knew how to make. However, this example is extremely personal, so I won't describe it in detail. I just want to mention that this horrible crisis, a crisis far worse than most other people will ever have to face, worked out surprisingly well, seemingly miraculously well. Perhaps God was moved by my prayer to help me. If so, I thank God with all my being. I will end this video by talking about mantras. A mantra can be defined as a word or sound repeated to aid concentration and meditation. Mantras can be thought, spoken, or sung. I'm not very good at sitting meditation, and I am far from an expert on mantras. What I can honestly say is that I have had some success in using mantras to deal with my thoughts and emotions. Instead of thinking counterproductive thoughts, I can often redirect my mind to think about something better. For example, instead of dwelling on my past failures, I can repeatedly think, do good, while slowly breathing in and out. Do, in, good, out. Then I find myself thinking, do good instead of thinking, you should have done this, or you should have done that. I can't change the past, but I can try to do good in the present, and good is always the best thing I can do. When I think do good in a meditative way as I go about my daily business, my thoughts become more helpful. I am reminded to actually do good, and I become better aligned with good and thus better aligned with God. As for emotions, my mantras for them get embarrassingly personal, so I will not give a detailed explanation about those mantras. Instead, I will say that I have had success reworking song lyrics into mantras that express my emotions. Thus, rather than helplessly suffering an emotion such as grief, I express that emotion in my head as a short, repeated song lyric. That self-tailored mantra helps me understand, accept, and work through the problematic emotion. Songs are well-known means of expressing emotions, but what do emotion mantras have to do with having a good relationship with God? At the very least, they help me to work through emotions that cause me to temporarily forget God. For example, let's suppose that I feel regret because, once upon a time, I did action A when I should have done action B. While I am feeling that regret, I am going to be thinking about it much more than about God. So I've got to work through that regret before I can more fully focus on God. To relate with God properly, it generally helps to focus on one's relationship with God. For me, emotion mantras are like vehicles that quickly drive me through unwanted emotions to wanted emotions. Simply speaking, from emotions that distract from God to emotions that focus on God. Thank you for watching this video. If you want a free written copy of it, just email me at jasonx1776@gmail.com. May reason, compassion, and hope prevail.